Hi guys, it's good talking to everybody. This is Harmon. I'm home sick with my son today, but just because I'm not there doesn't mean that we're not going to learn. And I hope that y'all embrace this opportunity to get better while I'm not. And while I am gone, y'all are going to do a little bit of work in probability. Now, today is just going to be an intro. I'm going to take just a couple minutes and explain a few things, and then let y'all answer some problems and see what y'all can figure it out, and we'll really dive more into depth when I get back with this. But probability is what are the odds that something happens. So, for instance, if you flip a quarter, what is the probability it lands on heads? Okay, now this is actually pretty easy to find out. There's kind of a way of realizing this. It is always this: how many possible options are there? Okay, in a quarters case, there's heads and there's tails. So there's two possible things that can happen. So that goes on bottom. This is how many possible ways it can happen. And then on top, you write what is how many possible things like fit the scenario. So there's two possible things here, and there's one heads. So there's a 1 out of 2 chance that a quarter will land on heads. Now, it may seem simple. It does get a little more complicated, the more complicated that the problem gets. Okay? For instance, let's look at his dice. On a dice, there are typically 6 sides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So there's 6 possible ways that it can happen. So there's lots of questions I can ask here. For instance, if I ask what is the probability it lands on 3. Okay, well this one's not too bad. You think how many possible ways when you roll the dice can it go, and there's 6 possible things it can land on. How many of them fit this? 1. So there's a 1 out of 6 chance that this works. Now, one thing I will say is sometimes you'll see this written as a decimal or a percent. So, in order to change it to a decimal in your calculator, you just do 1 divided by 6, decimal point enter, and you get 0.166, whatever, it just keeps going. So this is it as a decimal. To change it to a percent, you move the decimal 2 over. So this becomes 16.6%. Okay. Now there are different ways that this can go. We can make this more complicated. So, for instance, let's go back to the dice thing. Again, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are the ways it can go. Let's say I'm asked, what is the probability it lands on an even number? So in this case, we still look at what we have. There are still 6 possible ways this can happen. Still 6 things. Then you think, how many of them are even? 1, 2, 3. So there is a 3 out of 6 chance this would work. Or, again, if you change it to a decimal, 0.5, or as a percent, 50%. Since 0.5 is not enough, you had to add that 0 there. Okay? So this is how this works. That seems pretty simple, right? So let's look at another scenario on how this works. The old dreaded spinner. So for instance, in this case, what's the probability it lands on red or orange? Now an or implies it can go either way. So for instance, on this one, there are 8 things it can land on. There are 1, 2, 3 reds, and there's 1 orange. Now, there are 4 possible ways that this can work out. So, there's a 4 out of 6 probability that this works. Or, if you do 4 divided by 6, 0.666. Or if you move over twice, 66.6 or 66.7%. Okay? Now, these are the basics of probability. The last thing I'm going to end on is this. And there are some on the thing today, is what's called joint probability. Now, this is interesting because it's the probability of 2 things happening. So, for instance, let's say we both flip a quarter and roll a die. Now, I want to know the probability of 2 separate things happening. So let's say I want to know probability that the quarter lands on heads and that the die lands on a 2 or 3. Okay, now this only works if both things happen. So let's look at these things separately. The quarter is pretty obvious. There's 2 options on a quarter. One of them's heads. The 2 or 3, there are 6 sides on a dice. 2 of them are either a 2 or a 3. 1, 2, and 1, 3. So these are the 2 things separately. If I want to know the probability of both things happening, I multiply them together. So what's 1 times 2 is 2. 2 times 6 is 12. Well, guys, hopefully this is enough information to get you started on your probability. Good luck. Work your hardest today. Get a little better. Thank you.